In the golden glow of a late afternoon at Buckingham Palace, where history whispers through every stone, a single act of unchecked emotion unraveled into a lesson that would echo far beyond the courtyard. Karen Mitchell, a woman whose life revolved around status and self-importance, slapped a royal guard, believing his silence was weakness. What followed was not just a rebuke, but a profound confrontation between fleeting entitlement and enduring honor. A moment that left the crowd breathless and reshaped Karen's understanding of respect. This is the story of how one impulsive act sparked a journey of humility, woven with the threads of tradition, sacrifice, and the raw power of human dignity. The sun hung low over London, casting long shadows across the grounds of Buckingham Palace. Tourists milled about, their cameras clicking in rhythm with the gentle hum of the city. Among them was Karen Mitchell, a Connecticut real estate agent whose designer handbag and sharp American accent announced her presence long before her words did. Her pastel blouse fluttered in the breeze, and her diamond tennis bracelet gleamed with every gesture, a deliberate reminder of her wealth. Karen was no stranger to getting her way. Whether at country clubs or high-end boutiques, her status had always opened doors. But today, those doors were firmly closed. What do you mean the last entry was 30 minutes ago? Karen's voice sliced through the calm, her indignation aimed at a palace staff member, a dignified man in his 50s named Edward. His polite explanation about visiting hours and security protocols only fueled her frustration. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she demanded, thrusting her phone forward to display a digital business card for her mid-level real estate agency. The card, like her demeanor, screamed of self-perceived importance. Edward remained composed, his years of service lending him a quiet strength. "I apologize, Madame, but the palace's schedule is strict for security reasons. Perhaps I can provide details for tomorrow's tours." "Tomorrow?" Karen's laugh was sharp, her blonde bob swaying as she adjusted her designer sunglasses. "I'm not some common tourist who rearranges their life for your convenience. I have standards." Her words drew glances from nearby tourists. A French family quietly retreated. An elderly British couple muttered disapproval, and a group of Japanese photographers paused, their lenses momentarily lowered. As Edward reiterated the palace's protocols, Karen's gaze shifted to a royal guard standing at attention nearby. His scarlet tunic was immaculate, his bearskin cap a symbol of centuries-old tradition. To Karen, he was just another obstacle, another figure to bend to her will. Something in her expression hardened, a calculating glint that suggested she'd found a new target for her mounting frustration. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will. Someone who matters." Her heels clicked against the ancient stones as she marched toward the guard, each step echoing with purpose. Edward opened his mouth to intervene, but Karen was already out of reach, her designer handbag swinging like a weapon. The crowd sensed the shift in the air, a tension building. Like the prelude to a storm, Karen positioned herself directly in front of the guard, invading his personal space with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied. "Excuse me," she called, her tone the same she used to summon underperforming waitstaff. "Yes, you, the one in the furry hat. I need you to help me." The guard, a man named Sergeant James Harper, remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward. At 32, James was a combat veteran with tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, his medals hidden beneath the ceremonial garb but etched into his soul. His discipline was not an act, but a testament to years of service, a fact Karen was too self-absorbed to recognize. "Hello? I'm talking to you." Karen waved her manicured hand in front of his face, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Is this part of the show? Playing statue while paying customers are mistreated." Her voice rose, drawing uncomfortable glances from passers-by. A middle-aged couple hurried their children past, the father whispering about respect. Karen didn't notice or didn't care. "Look, I get it," she continued, her tone turning condescending. "This is your little routine. It's cute, very quaint, but surely you can drop the act and tell your colleagues to let me into the palace. I'm not just anybody. You know, James's jaw tightened subtly, the only sign he registered her words. To him, the uniform was more than fabric. It was a legacy of sacrifice, worn by men and women who'd faced dangers Karen couldn't fathom. Her business card, which she now produced with a flourish, meant nothing against the weight of that history. Karen Mitchell, luxury real estate, she announced, as if the title carried the authority of royalty. I sell multi-million-dollar properties. I'm the sort of person you want to accommodate. When James didn't react, Karen's frustration boiled over. Are you even listening? Or is all this, she gestured at his uniform, just for show? Because right now, you're not showing very good customer service skills. A group of British onlookers bristled at her dismissal of their tradition, and an elderly man with a veteran's pin watched closely, his weathered face unreadable. You know what? Karen's voice took on a sharp edge, the kind that had silenced service workers across New England. I don't think you're even a real soldier. No real military man would just stand there while a lady needed assistance. This is probably just a tourist trap. Actors playing dress-up for the cameras. She leaned closer, her expensive perfume cloying, and not very good actors. At that, the air grew heavy, the crowd's murmurs falling silent. James's discipline held, but there was a shift in his presence, a quiet power that seemed to grow with each insult. Karen, oblivious, pressed on. You people don't understand how the real world works. When someone of my standing speaks, you respond. It's basic courtesy. Not that you'd know anything about that. Standing here like a wind-up toy. Her Hermes scarf fluttered. The designer label, a stark contrast to the guard's unyielding dignity. She began circling him, her heels clicking like a metronome of entitlement. I bet you're not even qualified for a real military position. Couldn't make it an actual service. So they gave you a fancy hat and told you to stand still. The elderly veteran shifted, his campaign medals clinking softly, each one a story of valor Karen couldn't comprehend. A young mother covered her son's ears, hurrying him away, whispering, "That's not how we behave, darling." Karen leaned in, her voice a theatrical whisper that carried across the courtyard. Let me explain something about authority. Real authority comes from success, from status. I drive a Mercedes. I live in a gated community. I'm on the board of 3 charity organizations. Each statement was a dart, meant to pierce what she saw as lower-class resistance. But James's ceremonial rifle remained steady, its polished surface reflecting her distorted image back at her. The crowd watched, some with horror, others with fascination, their phones lowered out of respect for James's dignity. You think this uniform makes you special? Karen mocked, her manicured fingers drumming against her handbag. I've seen better security guards at the mall back home. At least they know how to treat VIP customers. The veteran moved closer, his medals catching the light, each one a silent rebuke to her words. This is your last chance, Karen announced, her voice trembling with rage. Either drop this ridiculous act and help me, or I'll make sure everyone knows how you treat respectable visitors. I have connections. You know, a young boy in the crowd asked loudly, "Dad, why is that lady being so mean to the soldier?" The question hung in the air, a child's clarity cutting through her tirade. But instead of pausing, Karen's anger surged, her face flushing deeper red. "You think you're better than me," she hissed, her composure splintering, standing there in your costume, ignoring someone who could buy and sell your entire year's salary with one commission check. Her free hand raised slowly, trembling with fury. The crowd held its breath, sensing the line she was about to cross. The sun caught her diamond rings, a glittering prelude to the act that would define this moment. The slap rang out like a thunderclap, Karen's hand striking James's cheek with a force that echoed off the palace walls. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A child began to cry. Someone muttered, "Bloody hell." The red mark on James's cheek stood out starkly, but his posture didn't waver. If anything, his presence grew stronger, his discipline a shield against her assault. Karen stood frozen, her hand still raised, a flicker of triumph giving way to uncertainty. She'd expected him to break, to crumble. Instead, she faced something far greater than her wealth or status. unshakable dignity. "Ma'am," James said, his voice low but commanding, cutting through the stunned silence. His eyes, which had remained fixed forward, now met hers directly. In that gaze was not anger, but the calm assessment of a man who'd faced mortars and lost comrades, a man whose strength was forged in sacrifice. "In my 12 years of service, I've been shot at in Afghanistan, faced mortar fire in Iraq, and buried brothers who died defending the freedoms you abuse." Karen took a step back, her heel catching on the pavement. The crowd was silent, even the pigeons seeming to pause. "This uniform," James continued, "is not a costume. It's worn with the pride of centuries of service. Each button, each medal, each crease represents the sacrifices of those who stood guard over duty, honor, and respect. Values you've shown you don't understand." The elderly veteran, whose name was Colonel Henry Walsh, stepped forward, his medals glinting. "2 tours in Afghanistan," he said, gesturing to James's chest. "That's what the medal he wears represents. It's not for standing still, ma'am. It's for valor under fire." His own decorations told of the Falklands, of nights spent in trenches, while Karen was likely attending gala dinners, while you were building your gated community. Men like him were risking their lives to protect the freedoms you take for granted. Karen's designer glasses slipped from her head, clattering to the ground. Her hand, the one that had struck James, hung limply, the diamond bracelet, no longer a symbol of power, but a weight of shame. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "You didn't think," Colonel Walsh corrected, his tone firm but not unkind. "You saw a uniform and assumed it was a prop. You saw discipline and mistook it for weakness. You saw tradition and thought it was theater. That's the problem with people like you. You've spent so long believing money equals power that you've forgotten what real strength looks like." A younger man, dressed in civilian clothes, but with the bearing of a soldier, stepped forward. "RAF. Sir," he addressed James. "2 years ago, your unit provided cover for our evacuation in Helmand. Lost 2 men, ensuring our wounded got out." James nodded, a silent acknowledgement of shared sacrifice. The crowd watched, some wiping tears, others standing straighter, as if the weight of the moment demanded it. Karen's face was ashen, her earlier bravado gone. The bearskin cap she'd mocked, the rifle she'd dismissed. They were symbols of a legacy she'd never considered. "I watched men die wearing this uniform," James said, his voice steady. "Young men, brave men, who understood that some things are worth standing for. Not for wealth or status, but because they represent values greater than any individual." 2 police officers approached, their presence calm but authoritative. The female officer, Sergeant Emily Carter, spoke with the weary tone of someone who'd seen entitlement before. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. Assaulting a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces is a serious offense." Karen's mascara ran in dark streaks, her carefully curated image dissolving. Her handbag slipped from her grasp, unnoticed, as the officers took her arms. As they led her away, Colonel Walsh gestured to James. "Take a good look, ma'am. That man you struck will continue his post with the same dignity he showed under your attack. The same dignity he showed under enemy fire. Not because it's his job, but because he understands something you need to learn. True respect isn't demanded. It's earned." The crowd began to disperse, but not before several approached Colonel Walsh, shaking his hand and thanking him for his service. The RAF officer saluted James, a gesture of unspoken brotherhood. The young boy who'd questioned Karen's behavior watched wide-eyed as his father explained the meaning of honor. James resumed his post, the red mark on his cheek fading, but the lesson he'd helped deliver burned brightly in the minds of all who'd witnessed it. But the story doesn't end there. Karen's journey, though humiliating, was only beginning. As she sat in a holding cell, the weight of her actions settled over her like a fog. The officers had been professional, their questions straightforward, but it was the silence that cut deepest. Stripped of her designer accessories, her phone, her status, Karen was left with nothing but her thoughts, and they were not kind. For the first time in years, she saw herself not as the powerful figure she'd crafted, but as a woman who'd let entitlement blind her to humanity. The next morning, Karen was released with a fine and a warning. Her assault charge downgraded due to James's request for leniency, but the legal consequences were the least of her punishment. Back at her hotel, she avoided the mirror, unable to face the woman who'd struck a man for no reason but her own pride. Her phone, now returned, buzzed with notifications, texts from colleagues, emails about listings, but they felt hollow. The world she'd built, one of commissions and country clubs, seemed small against the vastness of what she'd witnessed. Karen's flight back to Connecticut wasn't for another 3 days, and in that time, something shifted. She found herself walking the streets of London, not as a tourist, but as someone searching. She visited the Imperial War Museum, where exhibits on Afghanistan and Iraq brought James's words to life. She stood before a display of medals, each one a story of sacrifice, and felt tears she hadn't shed in years. At a small cafe, she overheard a group of veterans sharing stories, their laughter and pain a reminder of bonds forged in hardship. For the first time, Karen listened without inserting herself, without needing to be the center. On her final day, Karen returned to Buckingham Palace. She didn't approach the gates or demand entry. Instead, she stood at a distance, watching the changing of the guard. The ceremony, which she'd once dismissed as quaint, now felt profound. Each precise movement, each polished button, carried the weight of history and honor. She saw James, or thought she did, though she couldn't be sure. His face blended with the others, each guard a symbol of something greater than themselves. Karen didn't seek James out to apologize. She knew words couldn't undo her actions. Instead, she made a quiet vow to change, not just to avoid future shame, but to live differently. Back in Connecticut, she stepped down from 2 of her charity boards, recognizing her involvement had been more about status than service. She began volunteering at a veterans center, not as a board member, but as a helper, serving coffee and listening to stories of men and women who'd faced what she'd never understand. Her Mercedes gathered dust in the garage. She took the bus to the center, finding a strange freedom in anonymity. Her colleagues noticed the change. The sharp-tongued Karen, who'd once berated assistants for minor errors, now paused to ask about their lives. Her listings still sold, but she no longer flaunted her commissions. At a country club dinner, when a friend complained about rude service, Karen quietly said, "Maybe they're just doing their job," and changed the subject. The old Karen lingered in moments of weakness, but the new one fought to emerge, shaped by a single afternoon when her hand met a guard's cheek and found not weakness, but strength. Years later, Karen would tell her story, not as a tale of triumph, but as a cautionary one. She spoke at a local community center, her voice steady but humble, recounting how entitlement had blinded her to the humanity of a man whose uniform held more honor than her wealth ever could. "I thought I was important," she'd say, "but I was just loud. Real importance comes from what you stand for, not what you demand." The crowd at Buckingham Palace that day carried the lesson home. 2. The French family taught their children about respect. The Japanese tourists shared photos, not of Karen's outburst, but of the guard's dignity. The elderly British couple wrote a letter to the palace, commending James's restraint, and Colonel Walsh, back at his small flat, added a note to his journal. "Saw a young guard teach an old lesson today. They don't make them any different. Thank God." As for James Harper, he continued his service, both in ceremonial duties and, when called, in active deployments. The red mark faded within hours, but the memory of that day lingered. Not as a wound, but as a reminder of why he stood. His comrades teased him gently about the Karen incident, but they also respected the way he'd turned an assault into a moment of teaching. In quiet moments, James thought of the boy who'd asked why the lady was mean, hoping the child would grow up understanding what Karen had not. That honor isn't bought, it's earned. This story, born from a single act of emotion, asks us to reflect. When have we let our own frustrations blind us to the dignity of others? When have we mistaken silence for weakness or tradition for performance? The Royal Guard, standing sentinel through centuries reminds us that true strength lies not in asserting power, but in upholding values worth defending. Karen learned that lesson the hard way, but her journey shows that even the most entitled heart can change when faced with the mirror of honor. What would you have done in James's place? Could you have stood firm, not just against a slap, but against the weight of entitlement? Share your thoughts. For every uniform tells a story, every tradition carries weight, and every post, no matter how ceremonial, stands for something greater than ourselves.